The story of language is the story of identity, culture, and survival. Languages are not simply collections of words or syntactical arrangements. They are archives of history, repositories of cultural memory, and tools for preserving the essence of a people. For the Black Indians of the Americas, the languages they spoke were much more than a means of communication. They were testimonies to a rich heritage born out of the convergence of African, indigenous, and, in some cases, European influences. However, the violent processes of colonization and cultural erasure systematically worked to dismantle these languages, leaving only faint echoes of their once vibrant existence. To understand the tragic loss of the languages of Black Indians, one must first delve into the complex history of their identities. The term Black Indians refers to people of mixed African and indigenous descent, whose ancestries were forged through a unique yet tumultuous history of shared oppression, resilience, and cultural exchange. Africans, brought to the Americas through the brutal transatlantic slave trade, often found refuge within indigenous communities that resisted colonization. Bonds were formed, families were created, and hybrid communities emerged. These communities were the cradle of distinct linguistic traditions, born from the blending of African, indigenous, and later colonial languages. The origins of Black Indian languages were deeply intertwined with the survival strategies of enslaved Africans and displaced indigenous peoples. For enslaved Africans, the need to communicate without detection or interference by colonial authorities led to the creation of creoles, pidgins, and other linguistic innovations. Meanwhile, indigenous languages already had their own intricate systems of meaning, steeped in the spiritual and social fabric of their respective tribes. When these two groups met, their languages often blended, giving rise to entirely new forms of speech. These languages were not only functional, but also symbolic, representing the shared struggle and solidarity of these oppressed groups. The colonial powers that dominated the Americas, whether Spanish, Portuguese, French, Dutch, or British, recognized the power of language in shaping identity. For this reason, they embarked on systematic campaigns to suppress non-European languages. The languages of Black Indians, which defied European norms and represented resistance to colonial domination, were particularly targeted. These eradication efforts took many forms, ranging from forced assimilation through missionary schools to the outright banning of indigenous and African languages. Missionary schools played a pivotal role in the linguistic erasure of Black Indian communities. By forcing children to adopt the languages of their colonizers, English, Spanish, Portuguese, or French, missionaries aimed to sever ties between the younger generations and their ancestral cultures. Speaking one's native tongue was often met with severe punishment, instilling fear and shame associated with these languages. Over time, many Black Indian communities lost their ability to speak their hybrid tongues, as younger generations were coerced into linguistic conformity. In addition to institutional suppression, the brutal realities of colonization, war, disease, slavery, and displacement decimated entire communities. With the loss of life came the loss of languages. Many Black Indian languages were already vulnerable due to their status as minority tongues spoken by relatively small populations. When these populations were reduced through violence and displacement, the languages often died with them. The eradication of Black Indian languages was not only a linguistic loss but also a cultural one. Language is deeply tied to how people understand and navigate the world. For the Black Indians, their languages carried the knowledge of their dual heritages, African and indigenous. They encoded stories of survival, healing practices, agricultural techniques, and spiritual beliefs. The loss of these languages, therefore, represented the loss of a unique worldview, one that held the potential to offer insights into the resilience and ingenuity of these communities. Despite the overwhelming forces working against them, traces of Black Indian languages have survived. Some have persisted in isolated communities, where the reach of colonial authorities was limited. In these places, fragments of hybrid languages still exist, passed down through oral traditions. For example, certain Creole languages in the Caribbean and South America bear the marks of African and indigenous linguistic elements, even if they are no longer spoken in their original forms. The survival of these fragments is a testament to the resilience of Black Indian communities. In many cases, the preservation of linguistic traditions was an act of resistance. Elders who risked punishment to teach their children the old ways, storytellers who wove their language into myths and songs, and individuals who refused to let their identities be erased all contributed to the survival of these endangered tongues. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in uncovering and reviving the lost languages of Black Indians. Linguists, historians, and activists have turned their attention to the remnants of these languages, seeking to reconstruct their grammar, vocabulary, and syntax. This work is painstaking and often frustrating, as many of the languages have left behind little to no written records. Nevertheless, the effort to revive these languages is a powerful act of cultural reclamation. The revival of Black Indian languages is about more than linguistic preservation. It is about healing the wounds of colonization. For many descendants of Black Indian communities, reconnecting with their ancestral languages is a way to reclaim their heritage and assert their identity in a world that has long sought to erase it. Language revival projects have also become a means of fostering community pride and intergenerational connection. By learning the languages of their ancestors, younger generations can gain a deeper understanding of their history and culture. In some cases, the revival of Black Indian languages has sparked broader conversations about the legacy of colonization and the importance of cultural diversity. These efforts challenge the dominance of European languages and worldviews, highlighting the richness and complexity of Black Indian cultures. They also serve as a reminder of the resilience of marginalized communities who have managed to preserve fragments of their heritage despite centuries of oppression. The journey to recover the lost languages of Black Indians is far from over. Many challenges remain, including the lack of documentation, the scarcity of fluent speakers, and the ongoing pressures of linguistic assimilation. However, the work being done today offers hope that these languages can be brought back from the brink of extinction. The loss of Black Indian languages is a tragic reminder of the devastating impact of colonization on the cultural heritage of marginalized communities. Yet, it is also a story of resilience and resistance, of communities that refuse to let their identities be erased. The revival of these languages is not only a linguistic endeavor, but also a powerful act of cultural reclamation and healing. By uncovering and celebrating the lost languages of Black Indians, we honor the rich heritage of these communities and ensure that their voices are not forgotten.